Mr. President, today I rise to note some good news about the state of our American economy. Hard work clearly remains. We're still recovering from the deepest slump since the Great Depression. But I think it's time to appreciate our recent progress. Over the past few days and weeks, there has been plenty of positive economic news. Listen to some of these headlines. From the New York Times, jobless rate dips to the lowest level in more than 2 years. From CNN, Dow closes with the largest gain since March 2009. From Reuters, private sector jobs soar, payroll forecasts rise. From the Wall Street Journal, online sales reach record $1.25 billion on Cyber Monday. I know it's far too early to claim and start to celebrate, but I want to tell you a little bit about some of the details of this news. And I know back in my state in Alaska, just like everywhere else in this country, people are still struggling to balance the checkbooks. They face tough decisions about the cost of groceries, basic health care, college tuition for their kids, and just the basic expenses to live. Yet the recent news about our economy is very encouraging. And I want to give those specific examples. On the unemployment and jobs, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says total payrolls increased by 120,000 jobs in November, as the unemployment rate dropped to 8.6%. As the headline said, it's the lowest level in more than 2 years. And also, the latest news also marks 21 consecutive months of private sector job growth. I know some will come down and claim, well, that's not good enough. Well, I remember when I first came here, prior to me serving in the Senate, we were averaging about 500,000 jobs being lost every month. And let me repeat this one statistic: 21 consecutive months of private sector job growth, not led by government job growth, but private sector job growth. Important distinction and important statistic. So it's not robust, but it is growing. Again, positive news. On manufacturing activity climbed in November. According to the Institute of Supply Management, its indicators tell us manufacturing is continuing to expand. Another strong signal of overall economic growth. The American automotive industry is coming back strong. And think about it again. In 2009, the beginning, it was literally flat on its back, trying to recover. In November this year, light vehicle sales were up 11.4% compared to a year ago. That's the highest sales rate since 2009. And I'll note that that's when we put in the program right after that, Cash for Clunkers program, which many of us in this chamber supported. There's more good news about the automobile industry. Ford says its November sales rose 13%. Chrysler Group reported a breathtaking November sales jump of 44.5% from a year ago. And General Motors reported it sold 7% more new cars and trucks in November than it did a year earlier. On investments in the markets, again, a signal that's important. It's not something you should just judge the economy always by, but it's an important piece of the economy. And what I mean by that is so much of middle-class America is tied to the market. May it be their 529 account for their kids' education, or their 401k retirement program, or their own personal management of their account, or if you're self-employed, your SEP account. We're all tied to it to some degree. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed over 12,000 last Friday, a gain of 7% just in 1 week. And let me take a moment to kind of describe where we've come from in the market. Last week's closing numbers represent a gain of about 33% since January 2009, when several of us members just came into the Senate. But as you know, in 2009, January, the market still kept going down. In March 2009, it dropped to its lowest level, a little over 6,600. Last week's numbers represent a whopping 81% increase since 2009. And, you know, if you take the next step and you look at the S&P index, the Standard & Poor's 500 index reflects a very similar gain, up 36% since 2009, and since the dark days of March when it really crashed out, 82% increase. It's important because so much, again, of our retirements are tied to education, as I mentioned, to see the market move up. If you read or hear the pundits or the politicos around here, it's always doom and gloom. And, I wanted to come down to the floor just to talk about some of these issues because we are moving in the right track. We are moving in a positive way. But we don't hear this news because good news is never necessarily reported. It may show up one day and then disappear. Then when one bad thing happens, we hear about that for a week and a half, and then we're down here tussling back and forth about why it's so bad. But the overall numbers tell us the fundamentals are changing in a positive way. The other piece, which is consumer confidence, which is important because if the consumer isn't confident about the future, then they're not going to invest or spend or participate in this economy. But it is better. Last month, the Consumer Board's Consumer Confidence Index rose to 56.0%, the highest level since July. Americans spent $52.4 billion over 4-day Thanksgiving weekend. According to the National Retail Federation, that's the highest total ever recorded during the traditional start of the holiday shopping season. When I was back home for Thanksgiving, I heard this good news from many shop owners that I visited. The new Apple store in Anchorage saw record sales, thousands of shoppers coming through the door, and I will tell you, during Thanksgiving weekend, it was a cold weekend. And sales on Cyber Monday, the first online shopping day after Thanksgiving weekend, rose 22% from a year ago. Americans spent another record, $1.25 billion on that Monday, setting again the record sales for Cyber Monday. On trade, the trade deficit narrowed, not where we want it to be, but better, from $44.9 billion in August to $43.1 billion in September. That's the smallest trade gap since the last December and the biggest one-month improvement since July, according to the Commerce Department. On housing, which is a critical piece of our overall economy, some say it's why we're in the recession because the housing market collapsed totally. I think the housing had a huge impact, but there's many other pieces to the equation. But we never hear good news on the housing front. We always hear, again, the negative news. And there's still a lot of work here to get new home starts, get some of the current inventory off the market, help many people who are underwater, who are staying in their homes, to make sure they can continue to stay in their homes and receive the benefit. Pending home sales index. This is a forward-looking index based on contracts that people are signing. People who are now looking at a home to purchase and maybe entered into their contract and signed and said, I'll be purchasing this home 30 days, 60 days, 90 days from now. Was up 10.4% in October from the month before. And the National Association of Realtors say home sales are up more than 9% from the same time last year. Again, is it as robust as we want? No. Is it better than where it was? Absolutely. And it's because many of the policies that myself and my colleagues and you, Mr. President, have fought for on the floor here. Lots of times we make these decisions and then we move on and we go to the next issue and we don't have time to reflect on the results of the work we're doing. And in the last 2.5 years, since the Great Recession came into play, there's a lot of good stuff happening. As for the residential construction, this is, again, people building homes, providing construction jobs, providing new tax base for communities around this country that need it so they can hire the police and firefighters and teachers that need to protect these homes in their communities. The Census Bureau says it was at a seasonally adjusted annual rate of $239 billion in October, up roughly 3.5% from the previous month. And for my own home state in Alaska, again, spending time back home, I try to spend time with the small business community, asking them, how's it going? What's happening? What do you sense? What's your confidence level? In a meeting I had recently with a group of small business owners, one got a loan just very recently from the SBA, the Small Business Administration. Took advantage of the low cost that we were able to implement through legislation that we passed right here. It helped him get into the restaurant. now employs 120 people in my community in Alaska, Anchorage. Another owner of a video production company has had one of the best years ever, doing work for corporate clients willing to spend money. And finally, Mr. President, all of these are very positive developments. And now, as we approach the end of the year, we're in this chamber, we need to do our part to keep this momentum moving forward. I know people watch us and we're squabbling off and on over the issues. As I mentioned, all this good news is because of the work that a slim majority did over the last 3 years in this body, because we believed in the future. We believed in what the potential is of this great country we live in. And some maybe had different views of what could happen. But we believed in what's possible. And these statistics show us that belief is now paying off. As I looked at where we are today, we need to continue to make these smart public policy decisions that create a sound economy. And we need to do it as best we can in a bipartisan way. What I'm talking about right now is, of course, extending the tax cut for middle-class American families, continuing the tax relief, giving a reduction in our payroll taxes, which is due to expire at the end of this year. Before any of us leave Washington later this month for the holidays, we clearly have to resolve this issue. In my opinion, we have no choice, and here's why. Unless Congress takes action, the average middle-class family will be hit by a $1,000 tax increase starting January 1. Economists of all political stripes have called this tax cut critical for America's continued economic growth. They say letting it lapse could push us back into a deep recession. And truly that would be unforgivable based on where we are today and how far we have come in a short time of 2.5, almost 3 years now. But some on the other side of the political aisle seem unsure about renewing the tax relief, the tax cut aimed at middle-class families and small businesses. This after fighting for massive tax cuts for the wealthy in our deficit reduction talks. If they block this tax cut, about 160 million families will get the news during the holidays that their taxes are going up January 1st. That's simply not fair. And it makes no sense just when the economic indicators I mentioned a moment ago are looking so positive. As they said, if we don't act, a typical family making $50,000 a year would see their taxes increase by $1,000. But if we pass the middle class tax cut in 2011 for the 2012 beginning tax year, that same family would get a total tax cut of $1,500. Not only would they see the $1,000, but they'd get an additional because of the way we've crafted this. Most of the money goes directly into the economy. In Alaska, roughly 400,000 people benefit from the tax cut this year, and it's used and it pumped into our economy $300 million into our economy, which I know, again, the many small businesses, that I was, matter of fact, traveling through a couple of them with my son and his friend, or his son and his cousin, House of Hobbies and Bosco store. While they were playing all the games for free, playing the race cars and all that stuff and looking at which baseball card they need to get at Bosco's, I was asking the clerks, what was it like? What did it feel like? There's no question they sensed there is a change in the economy in the positive. That's because in Alaska, for example, these 400,000 people had $300 million in their pockets. Not here down with the IRS taking it and putting it into the Treasury, but they had it. They spent it. I will tell you, and I'll be frank about it, yes, after my son and my nephew, his cousin, spent that time on the free road there playing with toys, I ended up spending some of that money also to help my small businesses there in the economy. But that's what it's about. Nationally, this tax cut puts $110 billion into the American economy. And let me say that again and underline that for people. $110 billion. Money that could go to the IRS or go to middle-class Americans. I think the choice is very clear. Who should benefit from those dollars? We were elected here, as I was, elected from Alaska to represent Alaska and all Americans. not just those at the top end, but the people who work every day, the people we see, Mr. President, on a regular basis when we go back home or when we walk out of this building, or actually in this building, as you know, the cafeterias, the people that are spending the time every single day working hard to move this economy forward. It is our obligation to continue to do what we can to make their lives a little bit better by lessening their burden of taxes and giving them the relief, the tax relief that they deserve and that we should be able to give to them as January 1 rolls around. Mr. President, again, thank you for the time. I hope as we move toward the holiday season here that we can continue to give the gift of tax relief to middle-class Americans, to my 400,000 folks back in Alaska who have benefited from this, and all the small businesses in Alaska that have benefited from this. Let's do the right thing, do it in a bipartisan way, and let's move forward to giving continued tax relief to middle-class Americans. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.